Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving into one of the most complex, controversial, and absolutely consequential conflicts in all of human history, the Crusades. For the better part of 2 centuries, entire armies marched across continents, all under the sign of the cross, driven by one single powerful idea: to reclaim a sacred piece of land.
So let's break that down. At their very core, the Crusades were framed as a holy mission. The stated goal was to bring the lands you read about in the Bible back under Christian rule. And the ultimate prize? Well, that was the city of Jerusalem itself, the single most sacred destination for all of Christendom.
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? A conflict of this magnitude doesn't just erupt out of nowhere. To really get it, you have to go back in time, all the way to the 11th century. You have to picture a world on the very brink of a colossal clash of empires and faiths.
It really all got started with the rise of a new power in the East. This was a force that would push the Christian Byzantine Empire to its absolute breaking point and send shockwaves that would travel all the way to the Pope in Rome.
You know, it's incredible how quickly things spiraled out of control. It kicks off in 1071, when the Seljuk Turks deal this devastating blow to the Byzantine Empire at the Battle of Manzikert. They seize Anatolia, which is basically the heartland of the empire. Then you start hearing these stories back in Europe, Christian pilgrims being attacked, the journey to Jerusalem becoming more and more dangerous. By 1092, the Seljuk Empire is huge, and the Byzantine Emperor Alexios I is genuinely terrified. So he does something pretty unthinkable. He swallows his pride and sends a desperate plea for soldiers to his biggest religious rival, the Pope in Rome.
And with that one powerful phrase, Pope Urban II takes a simple request for mercenaries and turns it into a full-blown holy war. See, he spotted a massive opportunity here. It was a way to channel the violent energy of Europe's knights outwards, a way to flex his own authority over the entire Christian world and maybe, just maybe, heal the fresh wound between the Catholic and Orthodox churches. So he makes this incredible promise: complete forgiveness for all your sins if you take up the cross and march to liberate Jerusalem.
The reaction to the Pope's call was just massive. It was way beyond what anyone, especially Emperor Alexios, ever expected. But here's the thing, not everyone who answered that call was a battle-hardened knight. This first wave was really 2 very, very different movements.
So the first group to go is what we call the Peasants' Crusade. It was led by this charismatic preacher, Peter the Hermit. But really, it was just a chaotic, disorganized mob. They were completely wiped out by the Seljuks almost as soon as they set foot in Anatolia. It was a total disaster. But following right behind them was the main event: the Princes' Crusade. We're talking professional, well-armed, and well-led forces of powerful French nobles. Now this was the army the Pope had in mind.
And incredibly, against all odds, after a brutal 3-year slog across a continent, they actually did it. In the summer of 199, the Knights of the First Crusade smashed through the walls of Jerusalem and took control of the holiest city in Christendom.
Now, this victory was so much more than just symbolic. They established a real, solid Christian foothold in the Middle East that would last for almost 200 years. The Crusaders carved out 4 new territories, which we call the Crusader states, and the absolute crown jewel was the new Kingdom of Jerusalem. To a stunned Europe, this was all the proof they needed. Deus vult. God really did will it.
But, as you can probably guess, holding on to that territory was a whole different ballgame. Decades later, the fall of one of those Crusader states sparked a second crusade, which was a complete failure. And then, a legendary figure rose up to unite the Muslim world and challenge the European invaders head-on.
The news hit Europe like a thunderclap. After nearly 100 years in Christian hands, Jerusalem had fallen. The man responsible? Salah al-Din, or as he's known in the West, Saladin. His victory at the Battle of Hattin just shattered the Crusader armies. So of course, the Pope immediately calls for a third crusade, and this one was going to be different. This was a crusade of kings.
Now, other kings did join, but the whole conflict very quickly became this personal duel between 2 of the most iconic military leaders in history. You had Saladin, the brilliant sultan defending his homeland, and on the other side, Richard I of England, the Lionheart, this terrifying warrior who was absolutely obsessed with taking back the Holy City.
But here's the twist. For all his military genius, Richard could not retake Jerusalem. The war ground to a halt, a stalemate, which was sealed by the Treaty of Ramla. It was a compromise, really. Jerusalem would stay under Saladin's control, but unarmed Christian pilgrims were guaranteed safe passage to come and visit its holy sites.
So Jerusalem was still out of reach, but the crusading movement? Oh, it was far from over. Except, its original purpose was about to get completely and disastrously lost in a mess of politics, greed, and debt.
Okay, you have got to hear this because the story of the Fourth Crusade is just wild. It starts with a pretty simple problem. The Crusaders don't have enough cash to pay the Venetians for the boats to get them to the Holy Land. So Venice makes them a deal. Attack our rival Christian city, Zara, for us, and we'll call it even. Things get even crazier when a Byzantine prince shows up and says, "Hey, put me on the throne in Constantinople, and I'll pay off all your debts." They agree, but, shocker, the prince can't pay up. The result? In 1204, a Christian army that was supposed to be fighting for the Holy Land ends up brutally sacking Constantinople, the greatest Christian city on earth.
After that absolute fiasco, the crusading movement just never really got its mojo back. The later Crusades were just this sad series of expensive, pointless failures. The fifth was useless. During the seventh, the King of France actually got captured. During the eighth, he died of disease. The only real bright spot, if you can call it that, was the Sixth Crusade, where one emperor managed to get Jerusalem back. But he did it through a peace treaty, not a war, which really annoyed the Pope.
So, let's step back. After 2 centuries of war, with the Holy Land ultimately lost for good, what was the real, lasting impact of the Crusades? Well, it turns out it was about way more than just a simple holy war.
It's so important to get this. The motivations were a messy, complicated mix. Yeah, faith was a part of it, for sure. But for cities like Venice, this was a golden economic opportunity to control trade. For the Pope, it was a massive political power play. And for thousands of ordinary people, from knights with no land to poor peasants, it was a shot at something better, a chance for wealth, for glory, and yes, for salvation.
The Crusades also gave birth to entirely new kinds of institutions, blending the role of a monk with the role of a warrior. The most famous of these, of course, were the Knights Templar. They started as an order to protect pilgrims on the road to Jerusalem, but they grew into this incredibly powerful and wealthy international corporation.
You know, the ripple effects of the Crusades really did reshape Europe. The papacy became a dominant political force. International trade absolutely exploded, making Italian city-states rich and bringing new goods and ideas to the continent. And these new military orders became major players on the world stage. But in the East, the whole experiment ended in total failure. By 1291, the very last Crusader castle had fallen, and that was it for a permanent Christian presence in the Holy Land.
So, in the end, what were the Crusades? A holy war? A land grab? A massive economic venture? The truth is, they were all of those things at once. They were a story of intense faith, yes, but also of brutal violence, of raw political ambition, and of pure greed. They left behind a legacy of conflict and mistrust that has echoed for centuries, and they force us to ask a question we're still grappling with today. What truly drives us to conflict?